we have recently started making bacon-wrapped dates, and they are a delicious accompaniment to my morning black coffee. Julie's, I've already shouted you out. You have not responded yet. But
give us our goddamn sponsorship, Julie's.
He's picking it up.
I have so many bags of Julie's dates. These are just the ones that are not empty. Like Julie's.
Do you know how many people would be made so over the top happy if Corey received those Julie's for free?
You could.
Do you know how many people listen to this podcast? Millions.
Listen,
Millions.
Julie's, listen. If you sponsored us, you could say that our dates are doctor approved, because I am a doctor of clinical psychology. You don't have to say medical doctor, because I'm not a physician, but these are doctor approved, doctor recommended. I'm the doctor recommending them for your psychological well-being, because they make me happy in the morning with my black coffee to start my day. Julie's, pit-free, fresh measure dates.
Welcome to No Clear Answers, where we explore the common challenges all humans, creators, and leaders face, and we break down preconceived notions of common self-help ideas. We are your hosts.
I am Justin Mulvaney, and I'm an Enneagram 3.
I am Dr. Corey Wilkes, and I am an Enneagram 5.
I'm Rikki Goldenberg, and according to the test that I took last week, I am an Enneagram 6.
Are you all ready? Are you excited?
Oh shit! I don't know what that means, but oh shit!
You don't even know that you're a 6 yet, but we'll get all the way into that.
It's literally the one that Justin said I would not be.
Yeah.
So when I got it, I laughed. I was like, "You've got to be kidding me!" Justin literally told me this is not going to be your type, and I was like, apparently my inner subconscious was like, "I'll prove you wrong, Justin."
It could have been. Yeah. I have biases, but yeah. So today last week we did Myers-Briggs and personality diagnostics, and post episode, we were conversing, and I was shocked to find that both Corey and Rikki had some curiosity around Enneagram, which is one of the typing assessments that I said I liked for very specific reasons, but tends to be viewed. It's not super scientific. It can be viewed as a little woo-woo, a little bit less legitimate. It's one of the ones that's really commonly said. It's like as good as astrology. So I was surprised to find that Rikki and Corey were both interested in it. So we're going to use today as an opportunity to kind of deep dive into it. It's going to be a very different episode. We're going to explore and talk about why I like it, the different facets of it, how specifically, I like the way it's constructed, even if the buckets aren't necessarily scientific, and how I find its construction to be really useful. We're going to use that to explore some things with Corey's type, who we know, and then we're going to use that to explore and help Rikki claim her type based on a test that she's taken, which normally you need to be trained as a typist. I'm not, so this is off the record, not official, but we're going to use it to kind of like have some fun and explore the benefits of using a tool like Enneagram, even if you don't know 100% for sure where you land.
I don't know, man. I'm excited. This is going to be fun.
Cool. So, let me start with a brief overview, and then what we'll do is we'll go into the construction of my type, which is an Enneagram 3, and I'll explain how I think about it. You all can give some feedback on it. But so Enneagram is a personality typing assessment. It gives you a number. Each number has a different name that's usually associated with it. Different groups will have different names for it. But there are 9 numbers. There's a lot of different histories for where those 9 come from. Really, it's not super scientific. It's kind of just people's pattern matching over time. And Enneagram, at the end, when you get a number, the idea with Enneagram, which loosens it, but I think is helpful, is that you're not just one type. everyone has aspects of all 9 types, but there's a type that you tend to lead with. So people who are really technically diligent with Enneagram say, it's not I am a type 3, it's I lead with type 3. It's not that Corey is type 5, it's that he leads with type 5. And you may have other types that really resonate with you. You probably will also hear things about wings and arrows and all this other stuff. We won't get too much into that because that's where it kind of gets all over the place and goes crazy, but we'll build from the fundamental building blocks of Enneagram. So I am an Enneagram 3. Enneagram 3, that the type is called the Achiever, is what it's named, and it's what's called the heart triad of Enneagram. So Enneagram has a heart triad, a head triad, and a body triad. And each of them is viewed as having like kind of core biases in their behavior. So heart triad, which is 2, 3, 4, tend to be overly concerned with image. That tends to be a leading thing. Head triad, which is 5, 6, 7. So Corey tends to be leads with 5. Rikki, we're going to find out. But head triad tends to be overly concerned with fear. So what should I be concerned about? What are the risks? What's going on here? And then 8, 9, and 1 are in the body triad, and their bias tends to be towards anger, toward heat, toward what's right and wrong, and things of that nature. So I'm an Enneagram 3. Enneagram, the core thing that Enneagram is looking for is what is your primary motivator and worldview. This is like the thing that all of Enneagram is built on, and it's what's my motivation. And you can think of this worldview as, by now our limiting belief episode should have come out. So you can think of this worldview as also almost your core limiting belief that operates in the world. And so Enneagram 3, I'm going to share my screen here for everybody who's on YouTube. It's called the performer or achiever are the 2 names for it. And so the Enneagram 3 core worldview, again, this is their core motivation for how they show up in the world, or their core limiting belief is to gain, and I'll add, love and approval. I need to be successful. I need to work hard to be the best. And I need to maintain a positive image. And as a result, they tie value to what they do and to their accomplishments rather than who they actually are. Now, for a lot of people listening, you probably go, yeah, I get that. That kind of sounds like me. But there's a way that this is really the core, like, limiting belief of a 3, which is I need to gain love and approval outside of myself. And the way that I need to do that is I need to be successful, work hard to be the best, and maintain a positive image. That's the core thing that I show up and I look for in the world. And you can sometimes tie this to like childhood wounds. There's like a nature nurture component of it. So for me, the way that I see this true in childhood is both, one, as a child, my parents told me I was always very attuned to like observing. I was very sensitive to if people were critical of me. Like I kind of have, just from like a nature standpoint, always been attuned to what people are thinking about me. And so there's a component of this that for me feels very nature. There's another component that was nurture, which was like as a kid, it took me a long time to find what I like to do. And you know, my childhood, it was like, you need to be in these extracurriculars to get into college. And my parents had to do a lot of pushing to get me to do those things. And I think for me, there was a wiring that kind of came in. It's like, oh, I need their approval. And in order to do that, I need to work really hard. I need to try really hard. I need to be the best at what I do. And that kind of, those two things kind of went together, something that maybe was just innate in my system and the way I interacted in my childhood to kind of have this be the core worldview that comes in. So this is part of the reason why I really like Enneagram, is it kind of starts with the nugget of like a base limiting belief that then spreads upward and outward into limiting cognitive and behavioral patterns and tendencies. And so that, again, even if the buckets are perfectly scientific, if you find in your type there's a limiting belief that really feels true for you, you can start to see how patterns emerge on top of that limiting belief. And so the next one, and in this one, I'm going to ask Corey and Rikki to see if they have anything to ways that they see this operating for me. So we'll do a little feedback. The next layer of this, of how it was trained to me, was, okay, you have this worldview that's introduced to you. And as a result, it kind of forms a tint to your, both like the way you see the world and what you listen for. And as a result, there are things that you miss. So this is how kind of Enneagram would say, hey, your personality structure starts to limit you. So if we look at 3, again, the core motivation worldview is to gain love and approval. I need to be successful, work hard to be the best, and maintain a positive image. There's a way now that I start to default listen and see the world that biases what I can see, what I miss, what I can hear, what I can't hear. And so like as a 3, when I'm just sitting here listening, if I'm really in my structure, I'm very attentively listening to what needs to be done to reach the goal. How will the information being shared reflect on me? Will it make me look good or bad? And what will make me look good and successful? Those are my default listening filters. What needs to be done? How is what's going on making me look good or bad? And what do I need to do to look good for everyone else? And what tends to be missed, right, is we're so fast on needing to reach the goal that we miss the value of just like slowing down. What's here now? No goals. We miss, instead of just looking for what needs to be done, what are the risks and how's just everyone feeling in the space right now? And also, apart from what will make me look good and successful, what are my personal wants apart from what other people thinks? And so already, if the worldview of the Enneagram resonates with you, you can start to try and, how is that true about me? How am I limited by my default listening based on this limiting belief? And what do I miss as a result of it? And here there's also some listening shifts, right? Like if an Enneagram 3 is what you lead with and identify with, you can just have the practice of what happens if instead of, I notice when I'm leaping to what needs to be done and instead I listen to the other person's whole thought. What happens if instead of going to what needs to be done, I consider all the feelings in the space? And what if I start to just value connecting with people over getting things done? I found this to be very true for me. I'm wondering now if we open up some reflections, Rikki and Corey, when you think of me, how does this resonate as true, untrue? How does this line up with your experience of me?
So we've talked before, like as we were, developing this show, and as we have our like check-in meetings and things as far as like how things are going, where we want it to go, you typically are the much more structured, organized one. You typically lead the discussions, and Rikki and I are both like we've pre-agreed to that, right? Like you're the most organized. And we'll get to me later, but like if I do some shit, like I can wing it and be organized for a minute, but I pretty much live in chaos. That's just how my brain works. I'm more comfortable in that half the time. So I think, and you are just very task oriented. You're very good at breaking things down and just like a fucking machine, just like boom, 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 right? Like very methodical. So from that perspective, these patterns decently describe what I have observed in our relationship so far.
I think the thing that was resonating for me here, one specifically to you, Justin, but also in general to this, which is maybe why I think whatever, I'm going to just get into it, which is, yes, everything that Corey said, like 100%, I see that in you, Justin. And then also there's this component that oftentimes when we're talking about these things, it's also not just like, let's get organized to get organized. It's always, let's get organized for success. I never see it in you in terms of, some people who are like micromanagey and like, like you're very good at sort of taking us through where should we be going in order for us to be successful, in order for this to work. There's much more focus in the way that you approach this podcast specifically with regards to how can we make it successful. And so that being this like trending theme here is really strong for me. And also you and I have had we've had side conversations about like success and what does it mean and how is it going to look good and like, what does it mean for us to have a client that like might be interested in you or interested in me, and how does that reflect on you as success? So, and then it's interesting. And then also I had this whole other thought while you were talking, Justin, about Enneagram in general, because I know shit all about it. But I thought it was so interesting because when we were doing Myers-Briggs last week, one of the things that we talked about was the fact that Myers-Briggs was created in order to have all of the components be positive, right? A lot of personality tests and personality assessments, there's like a good and a bad. And what I'm finding interesting in this personality assessment, that as I'm reading it, I'm like, they all kind of sound a little bad. Like they all, because they stem from our fears, right? It's because it's stemming from like our limiting beliefs and our fears. They have this lens of, and for me, this is bringing up for me, it's like a little bit of like negativity. And I'm like, ugh, don't put me in a box. That feels bad. Like, no, I can slap a layer of optimism on this conversation. And so actually, as you were talking through this, I was like, oh, I see why Enneagram in general is a tool that you were drawn towards, Justin, because you're also the kind of person who's so interested in going in the layers below, like part of CLG's, part of like understanding like deeply who I am, how I show up, what my fears are, how they interact with me, how they're impacting my ability to be successful or to be loved or to be appreciated. And so this is like a self-fulfilling prophecy in the Enneagram space that I see in you. Like as you were talking through this, I was like, oh, I get why this one is interesting to you, because it highlights and plays in the discomfort, the fears, the negative emotions, and how they could be holding you back, and also how they tie.
Yeah, it's very growth oriented. And I agree with you, Rikki. There's a way that when I was introduced to Enneagram, and a lot of people are, it feels very critical. But I actually think as I've integrated with it more, the key to working with it is to actually owning the beautiful strengths of your type, so that you can also hold the limitations, right? So like we've encountered this on the show, as much as I'm the person who's frequently holding the banner of like, what do we need to do to have this grow for it to be successful? I also will sometimes be the first person to lose track of like, wait, we started doing this because we just wanted to have fun together. Right? I'll lose track of the essence when I'm really in my 3 and I'm leading with it, and I've kind of lost myself in that limiting belief. I'm like, no, we need to be successful, and lose track of also, we can just do this to have a great time. That actually was a resistance to me doing this episode. Like there's a voice in my head, the Enneagram 3, that was like, will the audience want this? Will they like this or not? Will this look good and be successful? And you all had to be like, no, it just sounds fun.
I'm curious, Justin, if you have a little bit of like the perfectionism Enneagram as well, because there was also a component that you didn't want to do this one because you were like, well, like I'm not actually a tester. You were like, I'm not actually, like I'm not actually fully trained. And you were like, so is it appropriate for me to do it? So I was curious if that was one of like your, what did you say, wings or?
There's wings and arrows. The perfectionist is type 1. I also type very high for type 1. So I have a lot of 1 in me, but the difference again, so if we start with this core limiting belief, for me, the 1's core thing is I have to be good. I have to be responsible and conscientious. I have to do things correctly and follow the rules. So if I really led with 1, I would say, well, I don't know that I want to do this because it's bad to do it if I'm untrained. Whereas for me, the why 3 resonates more is because I don't want to do this because I might fail. It might not go well. And so 3 resonates more because the core motivation is I need to be successful. I can't fail over I need to be good.
Another thing with this that, again, it isn't that we sat down and was like, this is my Enneagram. So before we start the show, like we need to like, pick our roles like before, like when we first started No Clear Answers. So much as we're like, okay, here is how I best show up. Here are my preferences for how I show up and how I work. Here are the roles I typically flourish in. Here are the things that if these were my responsibilities, I would not perform nearly as well. Here are the things that I would just outright become a resentful prick over if I had to show up this way, right? And because each of us, because like as we go through like, our own Enneagram shit, like you'll see these patterns also emerge of like, we all kind of agree that like, Justin, for you to lead, you are most comfortable in that position and we are comfortable with you in that position, right? So then it was just like this is what works for everybody collectively. Let's see where each of us shines and what diminishes each of us. So let's minimize the shit that diminishes us and let's try to optimize around where do you flourish the most? And then let's build the show from there.
Yes. And that's where, again, like the goal with Enneagram isn't to like demolish your type or totally get rid of it. Like as a type 3, it's perfectly fine to want the love and approval of others. It's perfectly fine to want success and to be the best and to want people to view you well. The real question of Enneagram is, can you operate outside of that? What happens for you if there's something I really want, but it risks losing love and approval? what happens if there's something I really want, but it doesn't align with success and positive image? And Enneagram's kind of helping you point to that edge of like, where are you trapped by, again, a limiting belief versus when are you free to operate fluidly within it and outside of it? The next layer of Enneagram that's a lot of core stuff that's said is each type has what's called a vice, and as a result, a respective path to virtue. And so why I love Enneagram is because this is where it has a developmental path built into it because it's constructed on top of a limiting belief. So for the E3, for example, the vice is what the word that's used for it is called deceit. And deceit is I need to be seen in a positive light rather than authentic self. And therefore, I deceive myself and others around who I really am and what I really want. And instead, I identify with an image that I'm trying to manage. Right? So again, in order to be loved and approved of, I need people to view me as successful. I need to be the best. I need to have a positive image. And therefore, the behavioral and cognitive pattern is deceit. I deceive myself around what I really want and instead try and manage an image for everyone else. Right? It's living for the eyes of others. And I see that for myself. There's a constant tussle between when something comes up in me that I think people won't like, I really struggle with it. Or the risk of failure because I think I need to be successful can feel really painful for me. Those are growth edges that are particular for me. But the beautiful thing about this is it paints a very clear picture of what the core growth edge is for that type. So I lead with type 3 and my core growth edge is veracity. It's authentic expression of who I am and trust that life occurs as it does without me needing to be the one who's pushing it along. And so the growth edge for a type 3 like me is me being really honest, especially when I think it might not be received well by others. And again, going into like how it's operated for us, there have been multiple times where in my 3-ness, I took on more responsibility than I was actually aligned with and kind of came back to both of you and were like, I don't want to be doing this anymore. And again, the structure of the type 3, that was scary. That's scary for me almost every time. Because it's like Rikki and Corey might not like this. They might not like it that I'm saying, hey, no, I don't want to do this. Now, again, this shows the type because every time I've done that with y'all, you've been perfectly lovely, right? But there's a voice in my head that is like, again, through Enneagram, it's the inner 3 that goes, oh God, they may not have a positive image. This may show that you're not the best because you can't handle it all. They're not going to like this. And again, that's the lenses. That's the limiting belief that the lens of the 3 creates.
Which is so funny because I feel like every time you've worked against that and communicated it to us, we are wildly supportive. We're like, amazing. Thank you for letting us know. Cool.
Yeah. But again, that paints the limitation of like, we'll use this language structure of the 3's personality structure. Because the voice that this structure whispers is you can't do that. It's only going to lead to worse results. You need to push. And what we found is every time I've done that, we actually get more aligned. Better things happen. We delegate more. We're closer to truth. But the fears of the type would say, no, don't do that. Bad things are going to happen. And this is where your type can be really limiting. So again, like the path to growth, this is also why I like it for coaching is because it provides a really nice lens. If I work with somebody and they say 3 really feels right for me, I know, look for where are they managed image? Where are they pushing for results and losing themselves? Where are they not valuing themselves outside of what they do? And I kind of have a nice set of lens for working with people. All right, I got 2 more for us. For my 3, and then we're going to hop over to 5. Each type, we're getting kind of deep now. So you can get a long way with just the things that I just said, right? What's the core motivation and worldview that feels like it resonates with you? What are the filters, therefore, that you experience and what's missed from it? And what's the behavioral bias and the path to a more integrated whole sense of self? There's 2 more things that can be useful, but we're getting out into the depth. So if you notice you get kind of confused here, it's sort of, I understand. Enneagram uses this language. They say each type has what's called a core defense mechanism. And the way this was taught to me was this is kind of the watchtower that is the first, kind of behavioral bias that shows up when, let me see, I might not have it pulled up here. Let me pull it up. This is kind of the first thing that shows up when we're starting to recede into the limitations of our type. And so for an Enneagram 3, that is called identification, is the defense mechanism. So get this, pulling this up here. So the 3, right? What the 3's worldview idealizes is I need to be competent and successful. What the type 3 really avoids is I can't be a failure and incompetent or disapproval because I lose love and approval. I kind of fall apart. And therefore, the defense mechanism is identification, which is I become what I think others value as a substitute for who I really am. And I over-identify with a role or a particular image. And so this is the reason why defense mechanism is useful is for me, when I notice I start to identify with something, it's the awareness flag for me that I'm starting to recede into the limitations of the type 3. So if I start to identify with, I'm the leader of this podcast and it needs to be successful, that's a sign that I'm starting to get back trapped again into the patterns. Another way this operates for me that can be kind of funny is I can identify as coach. And then sometimes when I'm with friends, if they're struggling with something, I can find myself being like, oh, I need to be coach for this person. Rather than just going, well, what do I want to be right now? Do I really want to be in coach mode? Do I want to be this? And so the defense mechanism of my type is finding safety and going, oh, I am a coach. I am this role. I am a good friend. I am a good partner, and losing access to things outside of that identification with a role. So when I use this with clients, when we talk about defense mechanism, that's for me the first sign again that you're receding into the limitations of the limiting worldview, belief, and behaviors of a type. And then the one last thing, this is going to get we're going to get deep into Enneagram, but I found it really useful for me is there are arrows in the Enneagram. So different types connect with different types. And one thing that the arrow can show is there's this language that's called soul child language. And it's the idea that there was a way of being that when you were a kid, it wasn't okay to be. And therefore you learned to be this way. And so for the 3 soul child is actually the 6. So the 6 is their kind of vices like fear, right? Like the world's unsafe. I need to do what I need to do to be safe. And so the 3's disowned parts, what the 3 says it's not okay for me to be this way, are frightened, insecure, scared, timid, self-doubting. So the Enneagram 3 structure says it's not okay for me to be those things. It's not okay for me to be frightened. It's not okay for me to be insecure, scared. I can't be timid. I can't be self-doubting. Therefore, I create an image so that because I can't be that way. And so another way for me, like a really growth-inducing practice has been learning to own and hold my fear. And when I'm afraid and insecure and timid and self-doubting, and let that be okay. And then surface that and move through fear and self-doubting rather than pretending everything is okay. So again, an example of this is like me telling Rikki and Corey, I don't want to be doing anything anymore. That was scary to me. It made me feel insecure. I was self-doubting. And there's a way where before I wouldn't have done that because I wouldn't have been okay with feeling that way. And so I would have just said, I'm just going to keep doing it. But in being able to let that be okay that I was feeling that way and then bring that into the space, I could kind of get out of the trap of needing to manage an image. And this is why I love Enneagram. There's a lot of, even if the buckets are kind of arbitrary, there's the way it's constructed. If you try it on and it feels right to you, it paints a lot of different, hey, here's what the patterns look like and a lot of different growth trajectories. Rikki and Corey, any final questions, comments, reflections for me before we play with Corey in this?
I like seeing you lit up about it. You can lit it. I like it. I'm like, doesn't know shit about this. I love it. I love seeing someone know shit about shit. And also, I've been looking at all of the forms that you've been showing and thinking about Corey as a 5 at the same time. And I'm like, feels accurate, Corey? Mm-hmm. Just so you know, Corey, I think you might actually be a 5. You might own your 5.
I accept that.
Are we ready to go to Corey?
I think that your walkthrough for yourself was really interesting. And from the perspective of you self-select behavioral patterns you engage in. And then based off of those patterns, you are then categorized into one of these 9 categories that collectively, overall, describe additional behavioral patterns. To that extent, I think this is decent.
Yeah.
But
that
both
added value that
listening,
it's not just like you take the quiz and it's done. It's like,
Yeah.
no, you take it and then you also have to really self-select and read through it, I think helps.
it's definitely a level above a BuzzFeed quiz. But also as like I read through like yours and mine and things, I'm like, yeah, this is really similar to like when I went to Pottermore to try to find like my Patronus and my house for Harry Potter. I'm like, they're like, oh, your Patronus is this because you said you like this and you don't like this, and this is probably how you are in real life. I'm like, oh, I'm totally, yes, I'm a Gryffindor. Yes, my Patronus is a hummingbird because whatever, which is actually what Pottermore said. So it's interesting to see yourself on a page. I'll put it that way.
Yeah. Yeah, the two things I'll add on that specifically I like that I think hit a little harder are, again, if a type resonates with you, there is thoughts on, hey, here's how to actually integrate and grow that I don't find many other diagnostics using. And really, if the limiting worldview resonates with you, there's a way, like our episode on limiting beliefs, there's a way you get to play with that. Like again, the 3 has the limiting belief is, hey, to gain love and approval, which one, there's a limiting belief already in that, which is love and approval lives outside of me. I need to go get that from other people rather than have it be something that I give myself. And the way that I get it from other people and therefore give it to myself is I need to be the best, be successful, maintain a positive image. Deconstructing both sides of that and seeing how none of that is true, how I give myself love and approval, and also how frequently I get more love and approval from people in my humanity, in my failure, in not being the best and just being a messy human. That unlocks that unlocked a ton for me. I'll just speak from the eye. All right, Corey. Let's check out a 5. All right, so Corey identifies as an Enneagram 5, which is called the Observer. Enneagram 5 Observe. Corey, want to read that first sentence of Worldview and Motivation?
Nope, but I will. Driving your personality is a worldview that the world is intrusive and overwhelming, and you need to protect yourself by withdrawing into your own mind and detaching from emotions. Did you say just the first sentence?
That? Yeah, just the first sentence.
Okay. I mean, yeah, I love Star Trek. I like the whole like Vulcan stoic thing. So I definitely retreat to, I mean, also like I'm a fucking psychologist, right? Like I'm all about like thinking and metacognition, thinking about thinking and trying to think your way through things, right? The second, so I'll read the second sentence because I call bullshit on it, but it relates. Second sentence is type 5s often experienced either being left alone or being smothered in childhood. And it's like, well, one, you're covering both sides of the fucking coin. And childhood is super vague. Like you could have had like a rough childhood at the beginning, but then like later it was just, that's way too vague. But I will say my childhood was let's call it a mixed experience. There were parts that were really good, and then there, trauma builds character. So there were some rougher spots, right? I will say that I was an arrogant prick of a child because I was like, okay, this other shit's going on that I don't control, but I'm pretty smart relative to my peers, right? Like they tried to skip me a grade, but my mom wouldn't let them. Like there's like paperwork demonstrating whatever. And I remember thinking, well, I don't control any of this other shit, so I'm going to take pride in how intelligent I am. I'm going to, like, I kept a dictionary in the bathroom. Like when I would take a shit, I would just read words and just learn words and just whatever, right? So SAT shit was easier for me. Taking Latin made it all easier too. So like I retreated into my intelligence, and then I kind of built part of my identity as a kid around being intellectually superior because I felt inferior in many other respects. Like I wasn't an athletic kid. I'm not an athletic adult. I didn't have, supreme wealth. I didn't have a lot of the other things. So I was like, well, this is the one thing that I do have that people can't reasonably take away from me, right? Aside from like a fucking TBI or something. traumatic brain injury. So I definitely learned that as an early sort of coping mechanism. And then thankfully, as I got older, I tried to become less prickish. But yeah, so that's an interesting entanglement.
Yeah. Yeah, that to me points to it's not always clear where your type evolves. Is it nature? Is it nurture? Where it comes from? I don't find that being as interesting of a conversation, because I agree with you. It's hard to know. It's very complex, but I see that for you. I mean, Rikki and I think, are both laughing that, like, my experience of you to a T.
Well, it's also so funny because, like, as you're talking, we also know we've talked about ADHD, and like I know you as someone who also, not necessarily out of like issue with the world, but also the way that you are productive, the way that you get things done. Like, I have seen you multiple times go down a weird hidey hole and come out wildly knowledgeable about a topic or concept or area that's incredibly robust, really complex. And you're like, no, I got it. But you leave, you go into this like world of Corey, and then we get to see the other side of it when you come out, which is part of this as well. That I'm reading this, I'm like, yes.
Well, and even
you.
even our group text, right? Like the three of us, that, like, we'll go back and forth. If, like, literally, if I get 3 texts in a row, I mute it. I'm like, nope, too much. Can't do it. I'll check back tomorrow or something. And then, like,
Justin and I are like chatting, and then Corey comes in like 2 days later
with like a fucking GIF or like a yep or like
Sounds
a thumbs
good.
up. Because I'm like, overwhelmed, too much. Nope. Mute.
Justin and I have an entire dialogue, and then Corey comes in 3 days later and is like, sounds good.
Yeah,
That's
so
it. And we're like,
this
thank
is
you, Corey. Like, we're like, cool, thanks.
this is such a great transition, because like, listening filters of the 5, right? What are the filters when you're moving through the world? Facts are information that is of interest to me, so I'm specifically looking for that. Potential demands on my time, energy, or other resources.
Oh my God.
And whether others are too emotional or intrusive.
Wait. Can I go on? Can I give something? So there was a time that Justin was sharing something, and I come in all emotion, all like, I see you, like, really, like, because that's how I am. Corey comes in and is like, sounds good, man. And like, he's like, I don't need, and later we talked about it. Corey, you were like, I don't need to hold you emotionally. Like, you are emotionally resilient, Justin. Like, you have your own dialogue. He was like, you didn't need me for that anyway.
I was like, you can self-soothe. I'm dealing with the facts. Like, yep, sounds good.
Yeah. And so, like, again, if this is the limitation of the type, right? If the worldview, the underlying motivation is I need to protect myself from intrusion or overwhelm, and by doing so, I need to withdraw into my mind and detach from emotions. That's the limitation. Also, a beautiful strength at times, but a limitation. What's missed from the default worldview is the value of emotional connection, the availability of support to you, and sufficiency and abundance. Therefore, the recommended listening shifts for an E5 are: listen for how you can make a connection, get in touch with your own feelings, listen for how you're being in that moment.
Corey, would you like to get in touch with your feelings?
So a couple things. If I'm, again, not actually psychoanalyzing myself, because psychoanalysis is bullshit, but diving into my own psyche, right? I have predispositions toward both distraction and obsession. So I can quickly become distracted, and then that becomes the obsession, right? Like you said, Rikki, like I'll occasionally just fucking dip and then come back with like a shit ton of knowledge about this random esoteric thing, right? That's just how my brain works. So a part of that is I'm like, okay, I need to eliminate as many distractions as possible, because I know my mind is predisposed toward obsession, whatever that is, right? Like, and thankfully, relatively often I channel that obsession into something productive, and I can go super deep on copywriting or, email funnels or some shit like that. Like, that's fine. Or mental models for coaching, whatever it is. But then other times, like, my neighbor's dog will be barking too much, and I will obsess over, can we bring hawks into the neighborhood to fucking pick up this goddamn Pomeranian so that it just is not my problem anymore? And then I'll spend all day obsessing over it. I'm like, I can't be obsessing over like the ways I can legally get rid of this dog, right? Like, I can't do that, right? But every time I hear the dog, my brain goes that way. Like I am incredibly easily distracted, right? I wear headphones all day, even if I'm not listening to music. I have to. Okay. That's just, rather than trying to change that or resist it, I've just accepted I am an incredibly distractible person and I am an incredibly obsessive person. So let me acknowledge his limitations and find strategies that work for me given those limitations, right? How can I turn, this liability into an asset, basically? But the other thing I've also found is growing up, when you are a more hyperactive kid, you tend to take things too far. And I don't mean like in an abusive way or like a hostile way, so much as like if we're joking, I'm like, oh, that joke landed. Let me do another. Let me do another. Or like if I'm, we're playing around, like we're tickling or something. Like, oh, that's fun. Oh, that's fun. Okay, that's too much, right? Like it's really easy to take things further than is socially acceptable. It's really easy to experience. So again, Star Trek shit. Vulcans, everybody thinks are like super stoic. The reality is Vulcans actually experience heightened emotions, like stronger emotions than humans, but they learned that because of that, they had to control them more effectively. Okay. People are like, oh, Vulcans don't have emotions. They actually have stronger ones. So when you learn that you take things too far, when you get wrapped up in the moment, when you learn that if you get angry, you get extra angry. If you get excited, you get extra excited. If you get sad, you get extra sad relative to what you perceive other people do. And it becomes a liability. It becomes an issue. Then you're like, okay, what strategies can I develop to be better in control of my emotions, right? Which is why I like Stoicism and Buddhism. And like I've told Rochelle this of like, I don't get excited very often. I don't allow myself to get excited very often. She's like, well, that's depressing as fuck. And I'm like, that may be, but the same skills that keep me from like getting too deep into negative emotions also apply to curb getting too heightened of positive emotions, because what I find is I get too excited, I get too hopeful, and then if reality doesn't meet my expectations, then it is more of a letdown, rather than saying like, I'm gonna just practice non-attachment. I'm going to enjoy the moment. I'm going to not hope, but enjoy it if it happens. But then if it doesn't, it's like, okay, it's fine. Right. And then if I do get excited in the moment, I'm like, I'm constantly regulating. Even when I think I am allowed, quote unquote, to be happy, to be excited, I'm like, no, because I'm a bull in a china shop. I am too big to get too excited. I'm too big to roughhouse too much. I get too into the emotion to let it run wild. I have to always be in control. So another reason I don't drink or do drugs. So so people are getting a peek into how fucking neurotic I am in just day-to-day life. So yeah. Stoicism, Buddhism for the win, man.
Interesting, Corey. You mentioned non-attachment, so that I want to take it to the next facet of E5s, which is, so again, each type now has a vice or a virtue based on what's been said, right? So the type 5's vice in Enneagram terms is considered to be avarice. So I need to protect my time, my space, and my energy from intrusions for fear of being depleted. Right, so there's a kind of a protective motion there, and they say what the path to virtue is what's called non-attachment, or letting go of what you feel you need to grasp in that moment in order to survive. And so for the E5, like the integration move, if the same way for the integration for a type 3 is to open into what's truly here regardless of what feels safe, the E5, it's letting go of what they need to protect their time and energy and developing a trust that, hey, I've got everything I need to meet what's here in the moment, and therefore opening themselves back up to connection to self, to feeling, to others.
And that's why like I gravitate toward, because like we've all done a lot of internal work over the years, right? Like that's part of it. So most of us have already adopted most of these like more beneficial strategies because we've already done the internal work.
Yep.
But younger me, very different. Like 18, 19-year-old Corey, very different.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a way where like Enneagram 5s, and they haven't done much work, like kind of live in a cave. Like they're real like cave dwellers. E3s in the same way. When an E3, before I did work, there was a way where you could really tell like Justin's faking something right now, right? Like there's something that's not what's really going on.
Well, and I will still default to like, typically like, I'm a hermit. Like I kind of live in my little office hidey hole. And when I get stressed, I isolate, which I know we're going to talk about isolation in a second, but like
Yep. Yep.
that is just how I cope. Like Rochelle and I, we've talked about it, like some people when they're emotionally heightened need to be comforted. Other people need to be left alone. And as far as relationships and other things and communication, that's really key to understand about yourself and your partner. Because it's like, just because I isolate doesn't mean that's how my partner needs to be dealt with, to be soothed, right? But I need to also communicate, like if I'm like emotionally like heightened, I'm going to feel smothered. Like don't try to talk to me, don't try to hug me, like leave me the fuck alone. Let me go self-soothe, do what I need to do to decompress, and then I can come back and show up better. Right.
Yeah.
But yeah, like that's still my default. Like to this day, I'm just like, I'm overwhelmed. I'm overloaded. I need to just have just fucking like my little cave, and then I can reset and come back.
This comes back to kind of Rikki, what we said, which is it's easy to make the type bad, but I think there's something in honoring that the way the type operates, it is inherently like protective, right? There's a way, Corey, where you feel vulnerable and you're protecting by isolating. There's a way where I feel scared and vulnerable and I protect by like hiding the part of me that feels like it's going to be unsafe to put out there. And so that's a key thing too with working with the Enneagram is you have to learn to love the type. You really have to learn to love the type and how it's in service of you. So you can go, okay, I'm scared, I'm isolating, and that's a sign that I got to work with whatever's here. And when I'm ready, I'm going to come out and unisolate. For me, it's when yeah, Rikki.
No, I was going to say, it feels a little like inner childish work, like inner child work in some ways, that there is like this component of, especially because so much of this is around, what was your childhood like this little nature versus nurture that hangs out here too, is that it makes sense that there's this component of like, well, where in your deep self do you need this support, and how does that show up for you is what I'm hearing here. For Enneagram, Is there an expectation that it shifts over time? You were just describing at fives that like ones who have had self-work versus ones who haven't, you might see differences there. But is there an expectation that it shifts over time? Or is it hangs out with us?
The expectation is you lead with the type that you lead with, but as you do your work and go along the growth path that it points you to, you are less frequently limited by the type.
Okay.
Right. And so like Corey said, it's like the idea is the way when you get defended, when you get below the line, whatever language you want to use, when you get triggered, you pretty much, the defense mechanisms very frequently look like the type. The more you do the work, the less frequently you get triggered because you see that the voices of what the type is saying to you aren't always true. And you can rebound faster. The idea with Enneagram is you pretty much lead with that type forever. And my experience is there's ever increasing layers of depth, right? For me, there were certain things that even at the surface that felt afraid to be authentic about, to be true. And now my work is I continue to find deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper layers where I want to be deceitful. It's scary for me to share the next inner layer of truth. And it's finding that next layer and bringing that out, right? A defense mechanism. I'm not going to go into soul child for any of the other types because I don't know them as well. I really know, well, I do actually know the soul child for 5, so we can kind of.
I have no idea, so it's fine. I had never heard that term.
Yeah, I'm curious to see. It's like disowned parts. It's parts of yourself that you've disowned. So yeah, 5. The defense mechanism is isolation, and 5, the idealization avoidance. Again, 5s, they want to seem knowledgeable, wise, unattached. They're head types, but as a result, they avoid painful feelings, being incompetent and not knowing. And the idea is when those 3 things show up, when painful feelings show up, when the risk of incompetence, when not knowing shows up, they tend to isolate, right? They separate from others, isolate, go into the cave, separate themselves from their feelings, staying up in the head. It's kind of that's the first watchtower that, again, you're getting limited by the type is I'm starting to pull back and isolate.
So I know we're not talking about like these in relation to like relationship dynamics, but I will say an ex I had was like the opposite, where she was like, she was like a whole theater major and everything like that, which, sorry.
How dare you?
I know, right? But she was like, it's bohemia. When an emotion comes up, I just let it just wash over me. As an actor, I need to experience the full spectrum of human emotions. And I'm like,
okay, Stanislavski.
It is the whole thing. It's just whatever. I'm not going to go too much detail into how batshit she was, but that's the official term, batshit crazy. But it was this whole thing of like, that was one of the biggest points of contention. I was like, no. Emotions should be controlled, because if you let the emotion overrun you, you're not in control anymore. Like your faculties are not in charge. Why would anybody ever allow themselves to be fully taken over? Because heightened emotions of any sort typically generally lead to a negative outcome. That's how emotions taken to the extreme work. And she was like, no, I want no filters, no gatekeeping, no nothing. I want to experience everything. And yes, in hindsight, she definitely had her own like legit psychopathology. It's a whole separate conversation. But that was the big thing. I'm like, we are fundamentally not compatible because of how that is.
Corey, there's something beautiful here that I'm just putting together, which a lot of the language you're using. So again, this soul child, it's the idea that there are aspects of another type that you learned to disown. I can't be that way. And that's where it comes from. And now the 5 soul child is the type 8. And so type 8, the way to think of this is like blab for your soul child, is like the bossy, lustful, aggressive bully. Like type 8 is exactly what you described. It's like big energy, lots of intensity, push things really hard. And the idea with the 5 is literally what you said. At some point you said, wow, I've got this inside of me and it is not okay. And so I pull back and I isolate as a 5. And so the idea of the 5 is when they're totally isolated. It's because they haven't learned to understand, accept, and be conscious around those parts. And a 5 who integrates goes, okay, I have these parts. I can be bossy, lustful, aggressive, bully. And they learn to integrate them in a way that it augments their life and brings more aliveness and flow and freedom, instead of, again, either needing to totally be severed from them or, like you said, having them run the show.
That's one of the reasons I rarely take the reins of something, because I know how bossy and how like rigidly absolute I can be in my expectations, and like to like a tyrannical point. Because like I've been the boss before. Like I've been, a high level manager. I've been, the boss in other aspects of things I've done. And I've been told before, like, hey man, you get shit done, but you're awful to work under. And when I found that out, I'm like, oh, I really need to work on like my leadership skills. And I did, right? Like I definitely did. But that is another thing of like, I know that if I am in charge, because I hold myself to a high degree, whether or not it looks like that, I do. I'm very self-critical. I just stay in my lanes of strength or my zones of genius. So you don't see the self-criticism as much. I'll give an example. The other day, every day before we leave, every night before we go to bed, I like religiously check like all the burners are off because we have a gas stove, all the doors are locked, all this, all that. Because I'm super forgetful, super distractible. So I have very rigid systems that I do things in to stay on point. The other day, some kind of chaos was happening. I was fully thrown off of the typical routine of like checking everything. And somehow, because we were going in and out of the door, somehow I didn't check that the door was locked. We came and we left and we came back home and the door had been unlocked the entire time. Thankfully, we live in a nice neighborhood, so it wasn't an issue. I obsessed over it the entire night. And Rochelle was like, it isn't an issue. I was like, I know it is an issue. Like intellectually, I understand nothing happened, right? Like 100%, I'm grateful. That's fine. The issue isn't that the door is left unlocked. The issue was that I left the door unlocked. And that is unacceptable for me to allow such a lapse of judgment, because, and then it's just like, this is why I'm so critical. This is why I'm so like, or I do the things that I do. This is why, like, whatever, right? Because when I'm not on point, shit like this happens, right? So, and she was like, why are you being so hard? So I'm like, I'm hard on myself like this every single fucking day. You just don't see that because I stay in my lane where I'm good. And I've developed systems to make sure I keep doing that. It's when the system breaks that I'm like, oh, this is why I have the system, right? So yes, I know how bossy and tyrannical I can be because I am like that to myself. So typically when like there's like a project, I'm like, I don't have to be in charge. I'm totally cool to like just play my role and to step up as needed. but I know that I have a propensity toward being too bossy. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and learning to integrate those parts, like some of my favorite moments in the show or working together have been when you've been like, hey, I have a thought that we should do this way. And so that's where it's like, when you can't integrate those parts and you're so afraid of them that you're just isolating, there's something that's lost. Whereas Corey, for me, when you show up and you're like, I'm going to run the show, or I think we should do things this way, there's a way where, especially again, for me as a type 3, for the one who feels like he needs to be driving the success all the time, I feel like I can rest into like, Corey knows this. Corey's got this. And so it's nice as somebody who works with you when those parts do show up in a conscious way.
Yeah, there's a lot of internal work. I will say with this that for you and me specifically. Sorry, Rikki. We'll learn more about your type here in a second. What I've noticed is one of your issues, Justin, is you have a low tolerance for inefficiency, right? And sometimes that comes up when we're like bullshitting before an episode, and like Rick and I, like we'll make jokes because like we can clearly see the moment that you're just like, all right, this is good enough, right? Like you start fucking, you get itchy, like you start standing, you're yawning, you're stretching, you just start moving, right? And so you have a lower tolerance for shit like that, right? Whereas Rick and I, we can keep bullshitting. Right.
Can I actually share what happens with me in those moments? It's maybe it's inefficiency, but again, for me, there's a way where like I want the episode to be a good episode.
You want to be perfect.
Yeah. And so before the episode, I'm like dropping into a headspace where it's like, okay, I'm ready for the pod. And so it's not about efficiency. It's my mental state is now starting to drift away from the mental state I want it to be in for us to have a successful pod. It's also, and now I start to get afraid that the pod's not going to be as good.
Exactly. It's like, is that bullshitting going to make the pod better? Or is it taking away from the success of the podcast?
That's it. And so for me, for a while there, I would let it go. And at some point I just realized, well, I'm distracting myself now. Again, it's similar to what you said, Corey. I just let you all know because it's like, well, now I'm not really present with you all and I'm kind of distracting myself. So I would just like for us to like, can we start the pod now?
Well, so this is what I mean. So you have a lower tolerance for things like that. I have a low tolerance for feeling micromanaged. So on the surface, it would be reasonable to expect that you and I would have friction because I'm fine to just go off for days talking about random shit, but I don't like being told what to do. You tend to gravitate toward a leadership role, and you don't like when shit just goes off the rails for no specific reason. But you and I have learned how to communicate and how to adapt to that situation. So those typically don't become issues. You don't micromanage me. I am looking for like, okay, we've been dawdling long enough. Now let's get into it. Right. And that is a way to like navigate these things that you would think would cause a lot of points of friction. And if you're not aware of it and willing to adapt and communicate, they can be, but you can very easily integrate a great team, even though you have very different behavioral patterns.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there's also a way that I'll speak from the eye. You're pointing to like, we both have done our work because there's a way for me where if I wasn't conscious of that, I would be like, why are we still talking? Why are we fucking around? This is bad.
You just be mad about it.
Yeah. And I would be judgmental of you guys and being like, you're not taking the pod seriously. We need to start now versus just knowing this is my tendency and being able to go, hey guys, this is fun. I'm getting itchy. Can we start the pod? And it's because I've integrated it really, like let's use the soul child language. I'm starting to feel insecure. I'm starting to feel like the pod might not go well. It's making me nervous. I'd like to start the pod now, and we can shoot the shit plenty after the pod is recorded, but I'd like for us to get into it. And that's from, again, integrating the like quote unquote disowned soul child, which is, I start to get nervous. I start to get self-doubting. I start to feel like I'm losing it and I want to be able to get into it. And so again, it's not banishing these parts. It's understanding them and being able to like make conscious decisions around them.
Well, and if you did commute, go ahead.
I was just saying, Corey, you talked about your childhood. A lot of people are surprised by this. I was like a sensitive, scared little kid. Like I was frequently scared before school. I was afraid to try new things. There was a big thunderstorm that came through when I was like 5, and I was terrified of thunderstorms for like the next 7 years of my life. And again, there was a way where my parents reacted to that in a way of like, we can't have this kid being scared all the time. And then I felt my fear risked approval. And again, this is my narrative around it. So I disowned those parts. I went, I can't be afraid. I can't be insecure. And when that happens, a bunch of weird patterns start to show up. And this is where it can be so useful to notice that and be able to integrate those things.
Well, and if you don't communicate shit like that to us, like if you were having all those conversations internally, that would just lead to resentment. And then you would have this narrative of like, these motherfuckers aren't as invested in this. They don't care. They're just fucking off. And then we don't know where you're at because you're not communicating. So then you're resentful. There's friction with us, and then shit just goes downhill. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, and that's like the E3 at their worst, is they're so deceitful about their own wants. We're so deceitful that like a huge amount of resentment bursts out. And then it comes out kind of with this like attack energy, when really the whole time it was like, I was feeling vulnerable and insecure, but I couldn't acknowledge it. So now I'm out on the attack.
And the same thing with me with feeling overwhelmed. Like I isolate. So I can become very like curt, like just very, very short with how I interact. So sometimes like I will preemptively tell Rochelle, like, hey, I'm just super stressed today. So I don't mean however the fuck I come across, I'm going to try really hard not to, but just understand preemptively, it isn't you. I am fucking overwhelmed today. And I'm trying to, I'm going to work on it as best as I can. But this is my defense to this. I become arrogant. I become self-isolating. I retreat back to, I'm fucking smart. I'm going to figure this out. And anything that tries to encroach and tries to distract me is now keeping me from my goal. Now I'm going to externalize. Now it's that thing's fault. So I'm just like, just leave me the fuck alone today. Let me just be a prick in my cave, and then I'll come out and I'll be way better. So even today, it's just like trying to communicate that of like, I'm trying to do the work, and I've done a lot of work, but today especially, I'm probably going to revert to old habits. So just so you're aware, I'm going to try to just remove myself so it doesn't become your fucking problem.
But I also think of that as being healthy, because there's an element of understanding your needs, your coping mechanisms, the things that support you at navigating discomfort or stressors. And rather than letting that emotion drive you, you instead are aware, hey, this is the tools in my toolbox that help me move through this discomfort in a way that feels safe and secure. And even we go a step beyond it, that we don't just go ahead and do it. We actually communicate to those that are around us that we love, so they know, and you know, that like, this is what I need right now. I'm going to go do this. This is not a reflection on you. This is not a reflection on us. This is what I need. So I think it helps highlight, like, if you're doing work, if you're doing self-work, if you're focusing on that and communicating it outwardly, that's not a negative thing. Like, isolation on its own is not a bad thing. There's nothing wrong with having to go into a little hidey hole and focus on what you need to get things done, or if you're overstimulated or if you're overwhelmed. It's rather when you do that at an extreme and you don't communicate it to anyone, you don't realize that you're doing it, you just sort of start cutting people off and being an asshole, right? Like, it doesn't mean that you're going to go be an asshole. You're not saying, hey, hun, I'm going to be a jerk to you today. You're saying, hey, I need to go do this thing. And rather than pretending that I don't, I'm going to go do this thing.
Yep.
You're connecting in your isolation. Again, through Enneagram language. It actually is a growth inducing move, because you're not just isolating. You're also connecting. Can we go to Rikki?
I would love to go to me. Let's discuss me. Let's talk
Rikki,
about me.
Can you screen share your outputs?
Oh yeah. Let me see if I can. Let me pull it out.
Yeah. And no worries, we'll edit the in between out. So take as long as you want.
All right. Let me see. Soup. Screen. Share screen. Let's see. Result. This one.
Do you have permission to share?
I don't know. Can you see it?
Yeah. Okay. Well, so scroll down.
Yeah, you want to see this guy.
Yeah, if you're not watching, you're going to be missing out on something.
It's like a circle.
Beautiful. So
with a little blobbies.
So you've typed really highly for 1, 2, 3, and 6. Beautiful. Let me just make sure I've got this. Type 1, you got 6. Type 2, you got 7. Type 3, you got 7. And type 6. What line is that?
Is that an 8?
You've got an 8. So you technically typed highest for 6. And then you've also got 1, 2, and 3 as being pretty high.
Yeah, it had It has them here. 3, 2, and 1.
Great. Yeah, so let's just read the worldview statements for you, and I want you to, without actually knowing which type they are, I'm going to mix it up. I just want you to kind of go with which feels like it resonates the most for you. And again, I'm not trained as like a typist. Typists would ask a lot more questions and things. We're just going to use this as an opportunity for Rikki to do some self-reflection and see what feels most true for her.
Okay.
Okay, cool. So let's just go through a couple of them. And at the end, Rikki, I'll let you kind of go, hey, that one really feels like it lights up for me. So one, you already know it's the 3, so I'll just read it. To gain love and approval, I need to be successful, work hard to be the best, and maintain a positive image. There's another, the world is unpredictable, and in order to be safe and secure, I need to be skeptical, vigilant, and well-prepared.
That's 6. I know, because I read that one.
To be loved and valued, I have to be good, responsible, and conscientious, do things correctly and follow the rules. And to gain love and approval, I have to give to others, be needed by them, and not have needs of my own.
A little bit.
A little bit?
A little bit.
Which ones feel like they resonate the most to you?
I think the first 2 and the last one. I think the one that I need to be good, that one about like being good and like following the rules, I don't associate. That one feels really, it doesn't vibe with me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense.
Because I'm like, like, sure, but I also have severe issues with authority, so it feels like that would be funky to play with.
What's your relationship with like risk? Like when risk and threat and things come up, how do you usually handle that?
I'm wildly risk averse in the sense that I love to be aware of the risks and then fuck with them a little bit. So it doesn't mean that I'm not going to do the thing, but I want to be able to understand what are the downsides of the potential. And then am I comfortable with that risk? Yes or no. And then I can move forward.
Yeah. Great.
I also like love to play. I'm not like a doomsdayer. Like I don't have like a grab bag or whatever, a go bag. I don't have like a go bag or anything. I'm not quietly storing seeds in my house, but I do think that there is this component of like, okay, I like to plan ahead, and then I've gotten better with a lot of therapy at not being like crazy about it, right? Like you still can't control for everything. Like it's impossible. I'm never going to. So a lot of times I have to work on the idea of for myself that it's like, I could try to control all the control. And there are things that are in my control. There's so much that's outside of my control. And the one thing that I can plan for is that I will fucking figure it out. That's what I can plan for, is that like I have a depth of skills and tools at my disposal. I can communicate my needs and like, you know, I will figure it out. It's kind of like, I have this really strong memory of when I was first learning to drive, that if you're on the highway and you miss your exit, you do not need to panic. You don't have to be like cross over 3 lanes of highway. Because guess what? There's another fucking exit. It's not going to be as convenient as if you hadn't missed your exit, but like you will just get off at the next fucking exit. And at worst, that exit is farther away and you'll turn around and you'll come back. And so like there's been that like really has resonated with me over time. But it's like, it might not be perfect, but you will fucking figure it out.
Interesting. Yeah. Like as you're navigating your day, do you think you feel more motivated by avoiding risk or kind of like by people and making sure you're taking care of people or how people are perceiving you?
I think they both definitely hang out. So like, I think my activities on a daily basis, I'm not like, oh my gosh, I want to skip risk. And so I will therefore do this. I don't think that's as ingrained in me. I think I'm more focused in terms of like in my day to day, am I helping others? Am I delivering value? Am I creating connection and relationships? That steers me more. But I do still think that there's something there that hangs out. You know, there's still like that scarcity mindset that like kind of lives here, right? Like, you know, let's say my partner comes to me and is thinking about doing something that has innate risk associated with it. My first response is going to be risk. my first response is going to be, oh my God, how the fuck do we mitigate the risk for that? But I'm aware of that. And so then my response instead is going into the human element of this. Well, okay, how can I support you? What is the right thing? And even voicing it, even voicing the fact that like, hey, you wanting to do this thing that's inherently risky. I hear it. I fear it. I feel it. I'm telling you that I see it. And yet like, let's put that aside and focus on what you need in this moment to support you.
But so your default, what I'm kind of hearing is your default listening filters are for potential difficulties. What are the risks? Well, again, here, the 6 listening filters are potential difficulties, whether someone can be trusted, hidden meanings, hidden agendas, what's not being said. I think you're a well-integrated 6, and I missed it because you've done some good work. And I think I don't see it as much.
Well, the trust of people is massive. That one is like one of the biggest things. Actually, it's one of the things that as I've worked in corporate structures, it is the section that is the most complex for me in a work environment, because I spend a lot of time looking around and being like, am I surrounded by snakes? Am I surrounded by people that I can trust?
Yeah,
recognizing that trust is built over time. I've used this language before, right? It's like, I'm very aware. And so then the thing that I really struggled with often is when I meet with someone that I'm like, oh, I can't trust you. How do I then work with them? That has been something that's been really difficult. Whereas there's other people that I'm like, okay, you're different than me. And there's risk in partnering with you because you approach things differently than I do. But it doesn't mean that I'm sitting there being in hypervigilance. Whereas like, you know, I've worked places that we bring in a new CFO that I'm reporting to. And I'm like, that's a fucking snake. And I know it and I can feel it and I can smell it. And I know it from day one. And then it's just about, okay, so how do I navigate working in an environment that I know I am unsafe?
Yeah. So it sounds like 6 feels as like the default for you when you're not feeling as integrated.
It's probably true.
That's frequently how it is. I hated when 3 was mine. I wanted to be a 1 so bad.
I don't. You did want it to be 1? Oh, I don't want to be a 1 either. I looked at 1. I was like, fuck this. I can't do that.
It felt more like moral to me and good, based in goodness, where 3, the image part, it made me feel gross, but I had to claim that part of me.
Yeah.
There's
2,
also Rikki,
2 definitely gets some heat for me.
Yeah, that also feels hot. That was my guess for you. There's this is with the arrows again, but there's a way where 6s disintegrate to 3. So when 6 are in stress and they kind of collapse, they go into 3 where they're like, I just got to try harder and be ambitious and be successful and all these things. And that may be why 3 kind of types high for you and why you have 2. But again, if I were coaching you, at this point we go, okay, we think Rikki leads with 6, but I know that she has the patterns of 2 and 3. So I know that Rikki can sometimes deceive herself like a 3 does to her true wants and will get wrapped up in success away from it. And I also would go, I know Rikki has some bias for type 2. Type 2, like I kind of think of them as like, I think Enneagram says the caretaker. I think of them, they have a martyr pattern. I give myself away and neglect my own needs. And so me hearing you say that lights up with you. When we work together, I'm both going to be looking for how is Rikki in the 6, like hyper vigilant, and how is Rikki kind of being a 2 now and giving away her own needs and tending to others.
Yeah.
But I guess we've got you leading with 6. Which again, the listening filters, potential difficulties, whether someone can be trusted, hidden meaning agendas, or what's not being said. What that type can miss is how could things go really right? How can fear be driving me? And what is my own innate personal courage and strength to handle this? You laughed, Rikki. What was that?
Well, I think it's one of those things that I think that because that is a limiting belief, that I think it creates an opportunity to play small, right? Rather than do something that's like bigger or more robust, I hang out in like the complexity around, well, how would I even make that happen? And go to all the details, right? And which is really the small little risks, the little components that you have to think about. Like I get caught up, Corey knows this. I get caught up all the time in like how the thing is going to come to light rather than the thing itself, and then like just work into it. Corey gets a lot of my text messages that are like, what tool would you use for this? And it's like, Rikki, it doesn't fucking matter what tool you, but here are 6 tools that are great. And he was like, thanks, Corey. Because like that is a thing that I get tripped up on, because that hangs out in the risk space that can help you play small.
Yeah, and so the genius of the 6 is de-risking, but what's lost is, are we overly fixating on risk here, right? Like, can we play in a different way that's not so worried about risk?
Well, I already fought against it by starting my own business. You know what I mean? Like,
Mm-hmm.
right? If you want to play in fucking risk,
yeah.
do
Yeah,
it
so
your own.
type 6, again, the vice is fear. The like mental fixation where the head goes to and where the behavior goes to is a fixation on uncertainty, worry, doubt, lack of trust about potential threats and problems. And again, the integration pathway, again, Rikki, which showed up for you in starting your own business, is courage. It's trusting in your ability to handle whatever's going to come without needing all the plans and all the preparation. It's noticing the voices of uncertainty and doubt and letting go of them, developing trust in yourself that you'll have the courage you need in any given moment.
So I think this is really interesting because we were talking about nature versus nurture. And I grew up in a house that had a lot of fear. Like, not because it was productive, not because it was supportive. And I worked, like, my household is, and I can think of it for everybody involved in it. Oh my God, I hope they don't listen to this episode. I just had a moment of fear myself. I was like, please don't listen to this episode. But they would own it that I have, they have a lot of anxiety. Like, some components of, in my family, there's a lot of components of anxiety or fear or playing small and dismissive and like not wanting to make changes or shifts or do something else because you want to be safe and secure and someone that comes from scarcity. But it is like, this was the model that I lived within as I was growing up, was this space of worry of, I still remember I did like my own little project, maybe when I first graduated from college, that was around, I had these 5 questions that I would ask everyone. And one of the questions was, what's something about yourself that you wish you could get rid of? Apparently at 22, I was already like leaning towards becoming a coach, whatever. So what is one of the things that like you kind of are aware that's something that you're not proud of, that's a component of yourself? And I asked everyone, and I ended up asking my mom, and she knew it immediately. A lot of people actually struggled with that question. They're like, oh, I don't know. It could be this, it could be that. My mom was like, worry. I am worried all the time. And I hadn't really thought about that until then. Until then, I didn't have language around what was it that sort of spearheaded my mom. Why were we going to the airport 5 hours early at like 5 o'clock in the fucking morning? It's like, that's traveler's anxiety, and you can see it sort of within them. And then my dad grew up in pretty non-ideal circumstances. And I think that because of that, he also had a lot of like, we're not going to take a risk on getting a different role or getting a different job because as much as this is miserable and terrible, it's like, I have income, it's safe. Right? It's like there's these spaces. And so I lived in that space for so much of my life and spent a lot of time working on myself to play with like, my parents, we've talked about this before on the podcast, that my parents, they always joked about how I didn't handle change well. And because there's risk associated with change, there's fear associated with change, there's worry that's associated with change. It took me a long time to figure out like, I'm fine with change now, especially. It's just a matter of the way that I navigate through it is a little bit more complex, but I do still make change.
This is another reason why I love Enneagram. I feel like the way it facilitates conversation when you try it on, like we've been working together for a while. Corey, I feel like I learned a ton about your inner world and landscape from you processing the things that were coming at you. And Rikki, again, I feel like I'm learning a ton about your inner world and inner landscape. And so again, regardless of whether or not the tool is 100% scientifically valid, I said last episode, I like it because it's useful. I find that like the places it points me to and the people I work with to mines a lot of really rich insights.
Well, I think it was interesting because when I first got 6, which I thought was hilarious because you had said, I'm definitely not a 6. And then now we're talking through and it's like, well, it sounds like I'm just a fairly adjusted 6. When I first got 6, I looked at it and it made me angry. I was like, no, this isn't me, because I've worked so hard for this not to be me. And yet like very aware, like that is still my initial response. And how do I work through that being my initial response and like having a very logical, rational, non-emotive response to that response.
Yeah, and this is why I like it too, because again, you're not saying is as I've integrated it, it's gone away. It's still reliably the place where when I get stuck, I get stuck. It's just now I have good language and pointers for how to move through it.
You also don't have to adopt it as your identity, right? Like, even though like a lot of
Yes.
these, like for me specifically, but again, like I could read a fucking Scorpio horoscope and be like, oh yeah, that's a lot of that is me too. Because honestly, they say similar-ish things depending on the depth of the horoscope shit. Not that I do a lot of astrology. Um, it's more so like, this is a way that other people can describe me. I do not have to take it on myself and build my identity around it. This is just one way to describe some aspects of me.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't even use it as a descriptor. I don't like tell people I'm Enneagram 3. For me, it's really a good tool of when I get stuck. This is frequently where I look and I go, oh, am I being deceitful? Am I lying to myself about what I want or someone else? Am I too image oriented right now? It's helpful for me around getting unstuck.
Yeah. Whereas I tell everyone I'm a Virgo.
Rikki, I want to go into defense mechanism and then soul child just to see how it works for you. So Enneagram 6, the idealization is I'm responsible, I'm practical. The avoidance is the pain of my own insecurity and uncertainty. And so the 6's defense mechanism is what's called projection, which is I project my fears, the disowned parts out into the world and onto people, and I kind of take them to be true. Right. And so the 6's defense mechanism is I'm starting to project my inner uncertainty, doubt, and fear out onto the world as reality, and I lose track of reality.
This is interesting. I feel like this might just be when I generally disassociate. Corey's laughing at me. Because there's things that we have to like, that there's moments that disassociation can be a very helpful, productive tool. Right? Like I had a miscarriage early last year that was very late, and it sucked. Miscarriages suck. Let's be fucking real. Everybody knows they suck. But I had one very late, and then I got pregnant again really quickly. And I had zero connection, like with the initial start of that pregnancy. And I kept asking, I was like talking about it with my therapist. I was like, when am I going to start feeling connected to this little thing that's occurring within me? And at what point is it unhealthy to just be pretending it's kind of not happening? Like, granted, it's not like I was like drinking a bottle of wine, but I was like just sort of like not really pretending it was real. I was avoiding the risk, the fear, the uncertainty that this thing might not come to fruition. And it took a long time. Like I was, we're going past the anatomy scan at 20 weeks. I'm pretty sure I didn't really know that it was happening until like he was at my face and I was like, oh my God, you're real. And like, now this is happening and the hormones are kicking in. But I do think that there's this component. I don't know if I necessarily project it outwardly, but I think that I take myself away from it. Like that is really resonant with me, which is that I do disassociate. Like I sort of am like, this is a thing that I'm going to have to deal with and is going to be stressful. And I don't know how I'm going to get it done. And rather than like getting into it, I actually just step away from it. I'm like, future Rikki is going to fucking deal with that shit. And she does.
Yeah, I know
Every time.
a lot of E6s who I've met before, describes himself as like when they get locked up, it's frequently in a freeze response, which is similar to dissociation. And so I've kind of heard that before. Great. And the last thing, so
solid 6, y'all. That's what we're learning. We're learning solid 6.
Who
knew?
6 soul child. So what the 6 has disowned are the qualities of type 9, which the acronym for you is SLEC, SLEC. So it's beneath the vigilant, anxious, responsible 6 is a spaced out, lazy, easygoing, couch potato 9 soul child who just wants to kick back, relax, and do nothing. And having disowned these parts is what drives the 6's need to be hypervigilant, skeptical, and not let their guard down. Rikki's covering her face with her sweater right now.
All right. So yeah. So 6 is accurate is what we're learning through this conversation. Because goddamn do I feel feelings about when I could be perceived as lazy or like not doing enough. Mm-hmm. Right? Even when we talk about it in this podcast that Justin is like lead, I spend a lot of time being like, oh, fuck, I gotta be doing more. I gotta be doing more. I gotta be doing more. Like, it shows up in me. That's when I'm 1 minute late and they've already gotten on the podcast and I'm like, fuck you guys. And they're like, you're late. I'm like, I am not fucking late.
That has become like the running thing for anybody listening or watching. Like even today, I got on the call like maybe 5 or 8 seconds before Rikki did, and Jess was like, "Let's pretend we've been here for a long time and just give her shit." And that's just the running thing now.
Because I show up literally on fucking time.
Every time she does, and Corey and I show up 30 seconds early every time.
I don't know how
and then we
they show
pretend
up
we've
before
been there
me.
forever. Yeah, but
Yes.
it sounds
the
like Rikki,
easygoing is a little bit different because there's like some manic pixie dream girl that shows up in that like a lot of people often think I am quite easygoing.
That's why I didn't think that you were a 6, but part of me,
Yes.
there's like...
I still remember I worked for a theater for a summer in Wellfleet in Cape Cod, and I remember I did a great job at that theater, and I remember someone was like, "So are you just like stoned all the time?" And I was like, "No." But they were like, "You're so relaxed." I'm like, "That's what you're seeing up here."
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's not necessarily an external thing. It's like it's internally. It's not okay for me to just be spaced out, lazy, easygoing couch potato. Those parts of me, they don't get to play very often. Instead, I'm hyper vigilant. I'm kind of looking everywhere.
Yeah, there's no desire ever to be referred to as lazy, and I actually feel a lot of anxiety when I'm with people who are even higher performers than I am, because I'm like, they think I'm like not doing anything.
All right,
Your girl's a 6.
Rikki's feeling 6. Beautiful. Any final comments, reflections on Enneagram? I want to say thanks for playing with this all in me. I'm again, last week I was surprised when you were interested, Corey. You being open to play has actually meant a lot because Enneagram has been something that's really powerful for me, and you've been a person who I've made up like wouldn't even be interested in hearing about it. So I appreciate both of your openness. It's been fun to play in it with you and like be able to explain why I like it so much, even when insecure soul child has been like, people think it's woo woo. You can't talk about this.
No, this is fun, and I'm always down to try something on just to explore it, regardless of how I feel about it, right? Because I think exploring these things, you get no clear answers, right? Like I think exploring things like this gives us other mental models. It gives us points of conversation to have. Because even like in this episode, like we've all like talked more about like some personal shit, right? And like kind of where these things show up, which I think is beneficial for us both to talk about, to learn about from each other. Maybe, audience enjoys shit like this. And I don't know, man, I think it's a fun thing to do just to see what we find out. So no, I'm down. The one thing I will say though, because we should have probably prefaced this at the beginning, so the ones that we're walking through, right? These are based on Enneagram.is. Like that is the one that you recommended. That's where we took more.
The assessment. Yeah, I like that location. You're right. I'll make a note of that at the top of the episode when I introduce it. But yes, Enneagram.is. I respect them as a group. They're affiliated with the Conscious Leadership Group. Other people have good things to say about narrative Enneagram. But yeah, people hold this in very different ways. So I wouldn't just jump in and immediately go anywhere for Enneagram, because some people do hold it more in a way of this is the box you live in. Describe like Enneagram.is and narrative Enneagram are the two I've heard good things about. They really hold it in this way as a tool for self-inquiry and for your development.
I think this is also fun because like we'll talk about mental models we use or frameworks we use in our own lives or in coaching, but we haven't like done like a deeper dive into like, here's what this actually looks like to work through, to explore. So even just as an experiment, I think this episode was fun to do and hopefully is enjoyable for other people.
Yeah. If anything, I think it points out well the ways that, again, like we as coaches look at people and the layers we're slicing through. I think Enneagram really captures like the lenses of, what is their limiting belief? What is their, motivation that might be restricting them? What behavioral and cognitive patterns might they be trapped by? What parts of themselves have they disowned? This is really a lens on how I think about myself and the people that I work with. Rikki, any final words from you? Our resident 6.
That was more fun than I anticipated. I feel like I really got to know the two of you more deeply.
I'll say everybody knew I was a 5, so that's fine.
Yeah, dude, reading the 5s while Justin was talking, I was like, I'm trying to pay attention to Justin, but I'm looking at the 5. I'm like, okay, Corey, I see you. I was like, there's nothing else Corey can do. Just kidding.
All right, y'all. This will be a long one. Thank you for listening.
Toodles.